So let's kind of move on to the next category, which everybody's always seeking: tenant improvements, right? So you're looking for a certain space. It needs to be modified because you're trying to better suit the space for your company, create a culture, create an environment for your employees, recruitment, retention, all that above, right? Make it a place where people want to come to work. Um, Similar to like anything else, um, and I can only speak for how it is in the Texas market and how things are quoted, but on a per square foot basis, let's say that for a new office space or a new retail, well, for a new office space, let's say, especially if you're closer to downtown, let's just say about $25, $30 per square foot. So on a 10,000 square foot space, that's 300,000 to 250,000 of money. That is either an allowance or is actually improvement dollars that the landlord is going to spend will be kind of considered a turnkey. So they're going to spend the money. An allowance comes to play where you actually kind of spend the money yourself to make the improvements, and then you just get reimbursed for it. But that can be tricky as well. You got to make sure the language is very detailed on how you submit your receipts, when you get paid, what things could hinder you from getting paid, what is classified as far as a tenant improvement, all that. But typically is paint, carpet, adding systems, HVAC, and all that, doors, glass, all the stuff to make the space that in turn, if you once you leave the space, those improvements still add value to the building. And typically, with your landlords, you have that discussion and they're going over the plans of what you're trying to do. Especially if it's a space that needs to be modernized, they'll be willing to invest that money because they're especially thinking like, hey, well, we got a tenant in there, and once they leave, it'll still be a more updated space where they can either just simply tenant it out without doing minimum work, um, and so it just varies. So with a tenant improvement, um, realize that TI dollars is not free unless you're paying for it. But typically, how a landlord does it, especially if they're doing their calculations, um, and they're doing a turnkey for you, or they're providing allowance, is that they're looking to get a certain return on the money that they actually basically are lending to you, right? And that can be anywhere from 8 to 12, to maybe 8 to 15% of the total TI dollar amount, which they're going to amortize over the term of your lease. So what you'll notice a lot of times when we have to have that discussion with the landlord, say something happens in the business and you need to end your lease or try to terminate your lease early, a lot of times the very first thing they're going to be saying, if they do happen to agree to it, is that they want to get reimbursed for the unamortized dollars, basically the dollars that haven't fully been amortized for the tenant allowance that they provided for you, and then the commissions that they paid out, right, for the space. Because the intent was basically to amortize all that, any expense that they were going to help you out with over a period of time. So um, that's something you want to pay attention to. Like I said, TI dollars are, money is never free. Nobody's giving you anything for free. It's always being paid, and more than likely, it's going to be paid by you in some form or fashion, either whether through rent, which is mostly the case, or if you have to come out the TI dollars yourself in exchange for a better rate. There's just different ways to go about it when you're dealing with TI. But TI is definitely important, and depending on how the market is, what kind of tenant you are, that kind of dictates how much you can get. Typically, if it's a renewal, landlords like to offer a lot less because you're already in the space and they figure you're not going to do too much. But oftentimes, what you want to do is look to those dollars, especially when it's especially when you're trying to revamp your business, make some changes to it. You're expanding, you're growing. You want to, act like, hey, I'm about to sign this extension for more space, about to renew. I want to be treated just like a new tenant, right? Because if I don't renew or if I don't expand, that space that's not being leased up. So I want, what the new people get. That's kind of our counter argument to a landlord. So there's some back and forth that goes between there, and then we eventually settle on an amount that works best. Especially after we have have your contractors go in there and kind of have a design plan and things like that to kind of get a good estimate of what that is. Um, but we'll dive into more TI improvement dollars and TI in general later on in the series. Um, One thing I think um, that we want to also kind of describe here a little bit um, is basically your sublease and um, assignment rights that you'll find in your lease. Um, so having a subleasing clause is a great option. If there's a certain amount of space that's not being used or you're downsizing, having the ability to sublease to another tenant to either take over your entire space or part of your space definitely works for you. Gives you flexibility as a company. Um, but it's not, as simple as just basically when you think subleasing that you're just handing over your keys and you don't have any further obligations. So what you're going to have in there, you're still going to be liable for um, the next tenant. Oftentimes, you're going to be liable to find the tenant, to pay for any costs for that tenant, which you'll see a lot of companies do. Um, and sometimes, depending on the situation of your business, maybe you need to leave, maybe you're expanding, maybe you got bought, you're ready to go to a different space, whatever the case may be, you'll end up sometimes subsidizing the cost of the space just to get somebody in there, and because some money that you're saving is better than no money that you're continuing to pay. So I said you're not completely free from your obligations. You're still responsible in the event that your sublease tenant doesn't pay rent. You're responsible for those payments to fulfill the obligation. Um, Now, what we try to do is, especially if we're looking at the market, um, depending on when you signed your lease and what the market is, um, you can potentially, how we try to do it is potentially try to get a spread in between there, right? Um, So let's just say it's $20 in the market. When you did your lease, it was $15. So you got a $5 spread in there. Sometimes you can negotiate to capture that. A lot of times you can do that. Well, a lot of the stuff you want to try to do is up front when you first sign your lease, because you got to start. What a lot of people don't realize that when you're signing your lease, you're committing to a long term. So you also got to think long term, not just short term, right? So what potentially could happen, and if we come to a situation, what are our options, right? So that's how you kind of have to think about that approach. So try to get the spread in between, especially if you, um, if you're having to find a tenant and all that. So sometimes you'll see language in there in your lease where you'll split the proceeds 50-50. So for that $5 difference, 250 to you, 250 to the landlord. Or it could be a situation too where you're paid first until you recoup all the cost of, maybe having improved the space or definitely your leasing commissions and things like that. Then once all that is subtracted out, then you can split the profits, or a lot of times depending on how much leverage you have, the landlord is going to say, hey, you're going to give me all that 100% of the difference. So it's all negotiation. That's the one thing I love about commercial real estate. Um, you can tailor everything's negotiable, and you can tailor to your business. It's just about making sure that each party gets something what they want and it's agreeable, and it's kind of a fair deal. And then when you have leverage, definitely use it to make just squeeze a little bit extra out of there, but not to the point to where it doesn't make sense for still the opposite party. Because that day you want to make a deal happen, um, so you can set your business up. Um, Part of also that is kind of like a termination clause, right? Um, so it's probably not often. I would say termination clauses are not often always granted. Um, Landlords are definitely reluctant to offer that because, like I said, it goes with predictability of finances, um, lending. If they end up selling it from an investment standpoint, it gets discounted. Um, and then, it's just one of those things where it really depends on what type of business, how much space, are credit tenant, does the landlord really want you in their space, that they've been trying to fill a certain space, and you're just willing to kind of be more flexible. So getting a termination clause, if you can get it, great. Um, it's um, kind of like you think about as far as TI, where it's more often structured to where if you do exercise your right to terminate your lease after a certain period of time, you will be obligated to pay for any TI, any other expenses that were supposed to be amortized over the entire term of the lease. Plus, for the right to terminate, the landlord would add an additional cost in there for you to execute that. So it's just one of those things where they kind of make you weigh, like, hey, if you really want to do it, it's going to be a penalty that you're going to pay to um, to exercise this, which will also include, maybe estimated time that they think the space might be down. So, paying for that and additional commission. So it can get very detailed. It can get very interesting having that conversation because typically, um, especially if you're, let's say, like law firms, accounting firms, and a lot of these guys who are, thinking in multiple years, they're going in, signing a 10-year lease. And then, after, let's say, 7 years, um, they have the right to terminate, or especially what happens a lot of times in retail, if they don't reach their certain sales numbers, or in the first 3 years, uh, if they're not reaching their numbers, their metrics, and things like that, it's just not working out, they'll have the right to terminate. So you probably see that a lot often in retail, especially from your national credit tenants, your Starbucks and stuff like that, your big box stores. Um, but again, like I said, um, there is a cost to it. If you can get it, definitely make sure you understand what you're signing up for, understand the penalties that are included, what needs to be paid back, all that above before if it comes to that, you need to execute. And sometimes it just works. Um, Another part of this would be your renewal rights, right? So often, often what you see is that in a renewal option, um, you'll see language that says that um, the tenant has the right to renew for another 5 years at market rent. Well, that's not really a renewal. Or you're better off just not having that language in there, in my opinion, because what you're doing with a renewal is, from a tenant's perspective, is to lock in your costs for your future costs and have it predetermined and preset. So you have the right, should you be getting closer to your period where you have to exercise your renewal, and you contact your broker, your advisor, and they let you know, say for instance, you had a rate at $15 and the market has jumped to $25, but your renewal rates are at $18, right? So that allows you to save money, especially if you have to, you you you're looking out into the marketplace, and you don't want to move, you don't want to pay the added cost of not only moving but paying the additional rates or different cost difference just to move for moving sake. So you got to set into where you're below market. Now, from a landlord's perspective, they want to have the flexibility of, hey, not being tied to a certain number because the market is up. They want you to pay market rent. Um, if the market is down, well, they're not going to want to offer you less. So, has seen that in there, and in my opinion, especially with our colleagues, and we're talking to our clients if they come to us and they're in the process of renewals. It's like what we try to do is have a actual set number, a set percentage, something in there that where there's a definition to the actual rate in a term, and not just giving it to be objective to where now when it has that language in there at market rate, and then there's like a whole documentation of how market rate is determined. Um, they get advisors. You have us. We submit our claim of what the market is. They submit their claim. The market is. If we can't come to agreement, then it goes through an arbitrator. I mean, it's just a lot that goes through. So either really just work towards getting a set number ahead of time, and then go from there. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Level Playing Field Procast. You can follow us, or actually follow me, on Twitter at Dominic Green CRE. Search us on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just type in the word ATENANTco. Or you can follow go to my personal profile on LinkedIn at Dominic Green Tenant Rep Advisor. For more information about us, go to our website at www.atenanco.com. And for immediate assistance, you can give us a call at 214-247-6211. And until next time, happy leasing, everyone.